Witchy and Weird podcast.
Hi, everyone. I am really excited because this episode of Witchy and Weird is actually our first ever guest podcast. I have talked about her enough on the podcast that I figured, why not bring her on? So I'm here with Caitlin. She is my business coach. Caitlin is a lifelong witch, serial entrepreneur of over 13 years, and the business coach behind the internet's most badass spiritual and creative entrepreneurs like me. Caitlin helps mystics bridge the practical and the otherworldly to create money on earth with her signature combination of Capricorn stellium, practicality, and intergalactic spiritual understanding. Caitlin's vision for the world is one where spiritual entrepreneurs thrive in businesses that provide safe, secure, and supportive structures for their cosmic dreams. I love it. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, and so some of you might be thinking okay, I'm not a business owner. How is this going to interest me? I don't know if I'm going to like this episode, whatever. And I've talked about Caitlin so much and what I've learned from being in her course, Bizcraft, because I think that it's applicable for everyday stuff. The concepts that she brings to the table are mind-blowing for me. And so I just wanted to bring that conversation here on the podcast because I feel like she has this unique teaching style and approach to her witchcraft, in my opinion, that's you make the decisions, you make the rules, you own your own witchcraft, you don't follow other people's rules. And I think that is something that we can all learn and benefit from. So Caitlin, I'd love to know a little background on you and how you even got to that mindset of being so badass and making your own rules.
How did I get so badass? You'll have to ask my mother, but I totally agree with what you've said leading up to this question about how this is really applicable to anybody, because I always say entrepreneurship is a lifestyle. And what that means is that what happens in your business affects other areas of your life and vice versa. But that applies also, even if you're not an entrepreneur, you also can benefit from the same inner work we do as entrepreneurs, even if your dream isn't to own a business, it's to do something else entirely. So this is totally applicable to anybody. And I'm really excited to have this conversation here. So really, I guess the way I got to that place of you make the rules, et cetera, was really just by always being a really rebellious person. Quite honestly, I was always the person who did things my way to a fault. I would find a way to get out of the things I didn't want to do in school and how to do other things I wanted to do instead. I mean, literally on my college admission essay, I talked about, I didn't have a lot of traditional extracurriculars, but I talked about, putting together punk shows in my town and writing a zine and all these other creative projects I had. So, and yeah, spoiler alert, I got in. But I always had this rebellious side, and that, really made me always come at everything from this place of, I'm not going to do it the way that I feel like people are telling me to do it or think I'm supposed to do it. What's the way I want to do it? And I learned from a young age that actually works more often than we think. Obviously it's a complicated conversation, but there is an element of when you decide to have something that's different from what other people are deciding to have by default. A lot of times we have more power than we think, and we can, make changes and do things in our own way. And we don't always realize that's available if we don't have examples of other people doing that. To be honest, I don't know who my examples were. I mean, my parents didn't really do that, but it's not like they, raised me in a super non-traditional way or something like that. Although they did in certain ways, but it really was this matter of I'm going to do the things the way I want. I'm not going to do things that I don't want to do. And that really easily, or out of necessity led me into entrepreneurship because, I was always that person in all of my jobs, where I was working for somebody else. I was always that annoying person who was, a really high achiever, but also did things like according to my entirely own rule book. And while, that would get me promotions to a certain extent, ultimately, that's not really the vibe that fits in a traditional workplace, And so from, my early 20s on, I was starting businesses because I was like, this job isn't going to work for me for X, Y, and Z reason. I'm going to do this other thing that isn't guaranteed, that is, something that isn't necessarily even like that profitable yet, but I have a vision and I feel like if nothing else, I'll have my freedom. And that was kind of always my attitude towards work as well.
I love that. Yeah, I definitely feel like it's a blessing that you're here because it's like you were rebellious and your rebellious spirit is like you said, like we need examples of other people to like show us that. And I feel like that's what you definitely were for me. And
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, like me to an extent, obviously, like I already had started my business by the time that I like met you and you came into my universe. But I feel like I fell prey to a lot of the traps of like new age spirituality, which is like a big thing that we talk about here on the podcast. And I kind of got stuck in these cycles of like, there's only one way to do it. I have to fix all my like problems before I can be successful and all these things. And having like your teaching style, like your beliefs was like really refreshing because you were like, no. You make your own rules. Like you can have a shitty week and still make money. You can still be healing and still be successful. And so I guess I'm curious to know like what, now that you've like lived through it, now that you're like at this point in your life where you're like teaching that to other people, like what like principles or things did you want to like share when it comes to like making decisions for like the people of the podcast?
I love that approach to this because ultimately it there's a series of decisions that lead us to a certain place. And I think the first piece is, like you said, recognizing that you do make your own rules. Personally, I'm completely allergic to dogma, and that includes new age dogma as well as, traditional religious dogma or even non-spiritual dogma. I'm allergic to all of it because I've just studied enough about, psychology. And of course, my awareness, I have enough of an awareness of, socioeconomic inequality and like all these other things that show me that everyone's experience is not the same. Now, this is a controversial belief, but I actually don't believe in the so-called universal laws because the reality is human law impacts what we experience on the universal plane. And that's for a very simple reason. It's because that's how our brains work. Our brains see what we've trained them to see, or more importantly, what the world has trained it to see. So this is why I say we can make our own rules, because there isn't a set of principles that exists in a vacuum outside of these other human-made, principles. So ultimately, you can ask yourself, like, okay, so for example, since you say you talk about this a lot, for example, if you're absorbing like new age dogma around so-called manifestation, and you're like, okay, it's a really common one. Okay, I have to like feel high vibe. I have to like reach for the better feeling thought. I have to like move up on the emotional freedom scale, according to Abraham Hicks, or like blah, 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 blah. There's this idea that you have to be better, more perfect, more ascended in order to get what you want. And what that can do, if you believe that, if you choose to believe that, what that can do is lead you to a place where if you don't feel those ways, you think like, oh my God, I can't attract anything good right now. And that's simply not true, because look at all the people in the world who have never heard of manifestation, who are, maybe not successful the way you want to be, or maybe they are, but they are successful in some way. Some of them aren't even very good people. Yeah. That right away shows us that there's more to the story, And so we can ask ourselves, what doesn't feel good that I'm currently believing? Because I always say, like, if it feels good and it works for you, keep it. I'm not going to be mad at anyone if they're like, actually reaching for the better feeling thought is really empowering for me and that feels good. Awesome. Yeah. Just recognize that's not the case for anybody. And this is where things can get really dogmatic because we tend to universalize our experiences as humans. And those of us who have success or who have experienced success from a technique or anything else, we experience what's called survivorship bias, which is a psychological, phenomenon, if we want to call it that, that's been studied, that basically says when the people at the top get studied and when they study themselves, they will say that whatever they did is what works for others.
Right.
Forgetting the fact that like right away, I mean, I studied sociology back in college. So it's like right away, you're looking at, statistics and things from an incorrect way because you're ignoring the whole experience of the people it doesn't work for. So I'm going on a tangent there. So let's back it up. So you can ask yourself, what am I currently believing about my world that feels like shit, that doesn't feel empowering? Last year, in the beginning of the pandemic, I was not in a good place, mentally, like many of us. And I made a decision that I've come back to again and again, that was, I can grow my business. I can move forward on my goals, even feeling like shit. I wasn't living the high vibe life. I was laying on my fucking sofa, hope I can curse, every night, watching Netflix and eating junk food. That's what I was doing. And some people would say that's not very high vibe. I'm putting that in air quotes, anyone listening to the podcast. But I decided I couldn't live in a world, especially somebody who is challenged by mental illness. I couldn't live in a world that required me to be perfect all the time, where I was requiring of myself to be like happy all the time and, this, that, and the other thing. So I made a conscious choice to make money anyway, to grow my business anyway. And what happened? My business completely exploded. So we can look at where we're putting artificial conditions on our success, and we can then ask ourselves, like, is this actually, am I creating a world I want to live in? Do I want to be stuck in this way of viewing things? And if the answer is no, ask yourself, what would I like to believe instead? What would feel more empowering? And you are allowed to do that. And once you decide, you continue coming back to that decision because, it's not always just like a one and done thing. Sometimes we have to come back to it again and again, but you start to create a different set of rules for yourself. I would say the universe doesn't make the rules, you do. And we can look at that from the perspective of psychology, spirituality, whatever you want. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself, what set of rules are you building everything on? And does it feel like something that actually serves the way you want to live?
Yeah. And I also like something that just came to my mind too, is like when you're asking yourself those questions, we talk a lot about like healing and trauma healing, and that's what I do in my business. I think like it will reveal a lot of those things for you too, because you're like, okay, why don't I like this? Why am I having so much resistance to this? Like, what is this new belief I want to have? Like, why is it hard for me to adopt this new belief? And, so there's so much that can be gleaned from like just asking yourself, like you said, those empowering questions. Like, what do I want to choose to believe? And why is it important to me? And you'll find like more information. And I think it's so freeing. Like, that's what I talk about on the podcast and with my clients. Like, whenever I teach, I'm the same way. I'm like, I'm going to tell you what worked for me and other things that I've heard other people do, but like, find what works for you. Like, don't just copy me.
Exactly. One, also, just to add on to that, it's important to recognize that, we get stuck in this idea of like where we have to fix everything. And this is actually something that has, I've dug into more in, my practice with my own therapist. But so often we're trying to fix the state we're in and so often as business owners, we think it's like our state is connected to the money we're making or whatever else. But there's a lot of damage that gets done when you're in that place of constantly having to change things. And I remember actually once in a session, my therapist told me, she said, what if you just sat with what is? Why do you feel like it has to be changed? And that was so linked for me, and I see it in so many other people, so linked to this idea that some feelings are good, some are bad, some states of being are good, some are bad. And right away, that creates a judgment that can sometimes make the problem worse over time.
Yeah. Yeah, because like in embodiment practice that I do with my clients, like I feel like the idea of like fixing things is because like we don't want to experience, like you said, the good and the bad. We don't want to experience that negative side for us. And so we're trying to fix it and run away from it. And if we were just to sit in it and allow it to be expressed, like there's still so much we can like learn either on a cellular level or in our minds, like from the negative feelings, from the feelings we're scared of or we're afraid of, and we don't want to like go towards. And I think that's really cool that it's like I can still be where I am and honor where I am and still like make progress in other areas of my life. It doesn't always need to be like me as a person. I'm always having to grow and reinvent. Like I feel like if we get caught in these cycles of like too much shadow work, and it's like we need to have space in between to like just be human. That's the point of shadow work, is to help make the human experience better and more enjoyable. So it's like do some work and then like be human, like have fun, like you said, watch Netflix, eat junk food, like do whatever. And then like when you feel like you're ready, then like jump back in when the new like thing is, you know, standing in your way and you're like, okay, I've spent like this month or a couple of months, however long it is, like just being human and enjoying the work that I put in.
Absolutely. And I mean, ultimately it's all sacred, you know, we're not like this obsession in the new age with ascension is so problematic because it's like, why? Okay, many of those people would also probably say, who are like obsessed with this ascension, would probably say, oh, you know, we're spiritual beings having an earthly experience. So it's like, well, where's the earthly experience? Why are we running from it? Why have we decided that, you know, Netflix and chill is less sacred than a meditation practice? Of course, like it's different for everybody. We have to know, what do I need now? And that's so tied up in this idea of the rules we're setting for ourselves. And we can also ask, you know, who benefits from this thing I'm taking on, this belief I'm taking on? Who benefits? Really? Is it me who benefits? If so, awesome, keep it. But maybe it's not. You know, hello, like who benefits from us feeling like we're only good enough if we are, you know, perky, happy, energized workers who are ready to make money? Who benefits? Capitalism, right. You know? And yeah, obviously sometimes we need to just like buckle down and move through a thing and, you know, do a work thing, whatever. But you get my point. You see the difference. And, you know, we need to really dig into the beliefs that we've collected, especially for those of us who are sort of seekers, because we can collect a lot of things that actually aren't really working for us at all.
Yeah. And I personally, like, I realized from taking your course, like, you had us do this like challenge where we like checked in every day for a month, like what was lighting us up, what was bringing us joy, what were we doing that we didn't want to do. And I kind of realized like I had a lot of subconscious like beliefs that were just running underneath the surface, and I wasn't really aware. Like you said, like I'm a seeker, like I took on all these, okay, this worked this one time, I was hurt this one time, this person said it, you know, and I didn't realize that like my ego was kind of like tricking me into like thinking like this is the way things need to be in order for me to be successful, when really it was like another like deeper, like more sneaky layer of like limiting myself, and like not, like you said, like I wasn't benefiting, I was still like myself to that lower standard.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about the power of choice and decision, and now I kind of want to bring this into like the witchcraft realm. So like you are practicing witch, like your bio said. And I'd love to know like how you incorporate like this type of like ideals that we've been talking about in your witchcraft practice.
Yeah, so when this clicked for me, it like truly blew my mind. And it might do the same for some of you, I don't know. But one day it was because a friend of mine had asked me, what does it mean when your spells don't work? You know, they had been kind of dabbling and, you know, doing some spells and things. I don't think they call themselves a witch, but they were doing witchcraft. And they were saying, you know, what does it mean when your spells don't work? Like, why aren't my spells working? And it opened up this big conversation about what happens when we don't get the change we expect. And as witches, you know, we are really connected to the change we're creating in the world. And so it can be especially noticeable or disheartening when it feels like something isn't working. And as I was having this conversation with this friend, which I'll get into in a second, I realized that the question I was answering had the exact same answer as the question, why isn't my business working? It was the exact same thing. And ultimately what it came down to, sure, yeah, like there are things we could look at in terms of like clarity and wording and like knowing exactly what you want and all this stuff. But ultimately at the core of it was, did you decide it was going to work? And at first, some people are kind of like, well, what is that? Like, of course I decided it's going to work. Like I did the spell, I want the thing, of course. And yeah, like, you know, you do shadow work. And so, I mean, so do I, but like you do shadow work as part of your business and with clients. And, you know, so I'm sure you dig into this directly with people, you know, the reasons we maybe don't want what we want and blah, blah, blah. But often there is this missed piece where, okay, for example, let's talk about in terms of witchcraft specifically. You cast the spell for $10,000. I don't know. And maybe you put a time frame on it, maybe not. But some amount of time passes and you don't have $10,000, right? So you figure, okay, why did my spell not work? That is the problem right there. Because if you had truly decided you were going to receive the $10,000 and that will was unshakable, at no point would you decide it hadn't worked. Because the only question would ever be, why hasn't it worked yet? Not why hasn't it worked? Because once you've decided to have something, nothing gets in the way unless you've made a new decision. For example, this is an example I give a lot because people they're not always able to feel like what I'm really talking about here. So I've been talking for 20 minutes. I'm a little thirsty. I have a glass of water right in front of me. I could choose to do the rest of this interview with no water because I'm like, oh, is it not a good time? Am I allowed to drink water? I don't know. Like there are many weird things you could think. I could also just decide to drink the water, which I'm doing right now.
Let's do that. Let's do that together.
So I just, right? So I just decided to drink the water. And as soon as I decided to, I did it and I drank it and I received the benefits of it. How does this relate to witchcraft? Say it's a candle spell, the lighting of the candle, the doing the spell, that needs to be the moment of decision. That is the line in the sand where you're saying the way things were up to this point is not the way they are after this point. And if that's strong enough, I promise your spell will happen. Or something better, you know, because maybe you get something better. But the problem is that people give themselves outs. So they think like, oh, it doesn't work yet, or like, oh, maybe I messed it up, or I didn't do it on the right planetary hour, or like whatever. And that self-doubt, when it creeps in, just kills the magic. It's the same in business. So many people, they're like doing the things in their businesses or any dream you have, like any goal anyone listening has that they're moving towards. You're doing the things, you're doing a step, you're doing the things you think you need to do. But if within you, there's this wishy-washy energy of like, oh, I never really thought it was going to work anyway, or, oh, I really feel like I don't really know if it's a good time, or like all this doubt, that's going to get in the way of your success. So what you can do instead is continuously come back. It's fine if you have doubts, but continuously come back to the reminder to yourself, I've decided this is happening. Or you can ask yourself, did I ever decide? And probably you'll know if you didn't, because you're going to be like, oh my gosh, of course. Yeah, I never really decided. I was like, if it comes, cool, but I don't think it will. Like that's the energy with which a lot of people do magic and move forward in their businesses. So it's really linked to not just witchcraft, but any change we seek to create in our lives. Because honestly, it's all witchcraft, ultimately.
That's literally what I was thinking. Like literally.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have for people who are like, it's hard for me to decide, like if I'm going to say I'm going to make $10,000 right now, like that's really scary for me to say, like how do I get to that point where it's like, I know this and it's true. And I full-heartedly believe this.
Mm-hmm. Well, the easiest way to do that is just to like really look at the goals you're setting. So I think in the online coaching world, it's become so popular to talk about like quantum leaps and, you know, like exponential growth and all these things, which are very real and very possible and very awesome. And in my experience, more people aren't in the place yet where they are even close to being open to that. And so that kind of rhetoric can be like a self-sabotaging kind of thing. So one thing you can do is just like bring the goal a little bit closer to home. Make it something that's a little more believable, because if you can't even remotely believe it's possible, it's a waste of time. It really is. You can, of course, work on your self-belief, and you can do shadow work around like what you believe you get to have. But while you're doing that, let's take a two-pronged approach. While you're doing that, you can ask, okay, like what is a goal that would be a big jump, but still feels within my realm of possibility? And sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's a subtle difference. Sometimes we have like a weird thing around $10,000, but 9,000 feels fine, So we can ask ourselves, do I want to sabotage myself because 10,000 gets me in my head? Or do I want to bring it a little bit down? It's still a buttload of money. I'm super excited about it, but I can really believe that's going to happen. So you can do that while also asking yourself on the side, what's the difference between 9 and 10,000 for me? Like, what's that really about? And that comes down to beliefs sometimes, and like memories stored in our nervous system and all kinds of stuff. So you can definitely do that. You can break down the goal a little bit more. And then also something I'm actually learning about more recently is in human design, which I'm not an expert in, I'm learning about myself. But there's this concept of something you can look for in your chart. You could just Google this. Everyone's either a specific or a non-specific manifester. Yeah. So most of the like manifestation, witchcraft discussion is around specificity. And it's not saying you can't be specific, but depending on whether you're a specific or non-specific manifester, according to human design, that will impact how you best set your goals. So I'm a non-specific manifester, and I struggled for a long time thinking like, okay, I have to make a monetary goal every single month, and I either hit it or I don't. And I do that sometimes still, but what I've noticed feels better and is actually much more effective and faster is focusing on less specific things. So for example, I've been focusing on the concept of overflow because I noticed that didn't matter if I was making 5, 10, 20, 30,000 a month. I was still sometimes feeling the same sense of like, it's not enough, right? So as a non-specific manifestor, I started focusing more on that feeling of like, how do I want this to feel? I want this to feel like more than enough, which can happen at any of those income levels. It's not about the amount, believe it or not. So it's important to ask yourself, like, what kind of goals light you up? What kind of turns you on? What gets you excited? And don't be afraid of setting the goal slightly differently than what you have been told by some manifestation person that you're like supposed to do it, because we are all different in that area for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So a few things for that. I'm also non-specific. Mm-hmm. That was hard for me too, because I had only seen stuff where it's like, be very specific.
Right. Right.
Like, so what do you do?
To write a number on a check on the wall or something. Never done that in my life.
Yeah. And I like that. Like how you're saying, like either the feeling is really important. Like for me, when I got a human design reading, they were saying like visualization is really important for me, like visualizing what it looks like, because that's like less specific. Cool. And you were saying like overflow. So like, if you're like, well, what does that mean? Like one thing that we talked about in the course that I did with you is like, I always have more than enough money to pay my bills. Or like you said, I always have an overflow of money, like things like that. And the second thing that came up, which was really cool, is like, you were talking about the goal setting. Like for me, a point of like sabotage that I do for myself is I set my goals like super, super high, and I have like a specific number. And then when I don't meet it, I'm like very disheartened and I'm very sad. And so I like that idea of like meeting yourself where it feels like more comfortable, instead of like trying to achieve somebody else's goal. Like we talked about like the coaching, like I made $1 million in this many months, or you can break it in 3 months. And it's like, cool, I'm going to try and do that, and employ it. And it's like, well, maybe that just like is too like scary for you. That's too unsafe for you. And I'll put this in terms of like non-business. So where it's like creating safety in your body. Like I'm, like, do you want to feel safe in your body? Like maybe I'm not feeling safe in my body. I'm feeling safer in my body, right? Like it might be too hard for us to get to that, like all the way. I made it 0 to 60 goal. So I like the idea of like finding that happy medium. Like, does this feel a little bit, easier for me? Does this feel more attainable? And sometimes even just taking it down to like step 1, like I'm making 1 sale. I'm doing 1 thing to get me there. Cause then you're showing your body like this is attainable, this happened.
Totally.
And like you were saying, we need that framework, that example of like it being done before. And then afterwards you're like, cool, now I could do 2. Now I could do 3. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a really common problem, actually, what you just described. And I used to do that as well. Because, it's so easy to, first of all, like see certain numbers, if it's a business thing, or even like certain dreams, that you are like see maybe all over Instagram. Maybe it feels like everyone else is buying a house except for you. And that's the thing you want to do. I don't know. So this applies to anything, but what happens a lot is, for some people, setting that really high goal, it is exciting. And whether they make it or not, they're moving closer, which is always the case for all of us, but that feels exciting. But for other people, it can be self-sabotage, because it's a way of almost like giving yourself an out, because then when it doesn't happen, you can say, well, I knew it wasn't going to happen. The goal was too big. And so again, this isn't about, everyone listening, you have to do it a certain way. It's about knowing yourself and playing with, exploring your natural energetic frequency around these things, because it's going to be different. And also, like, things can feel different to different people. And really, we have to all be willing to do the exploration to discover what works for us. And then, of course, you can share that, but recognize that we all have these unique energetic signatures, and it's going to be different for different people. And so it's really important for us to look at things outside of what, the so-called mainstream is telling us to do in some of these areas.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. Like, instead of looking to other teachers, looking to other people on the internet as like, okay, how do I copy what they're doing? Like, I'm just gonna like take every word that they say and try it. But look at it more like you said, like, this is just an example of it can be done, and I just need to find my way of like how that works for me. So like, you can maybe learn new methods from different people, like how I learned like I need to do it my own way from you instead of like just copying what other people do. So I really like that too. And also I do want to highlight something that came up that I feel like is really important that you said, moving closer to the goal. I feel like people, when we're making decisions and we're making choices, we're like, it didn't happen exactly as I wanted it to, or in the time frame I wanted it to, or I never reached my goal at all. And I think like acknowledging the progress is really important. Like you're saying, like, either way, I'm moving closer. Like, I'm making the decision, and I'm making like inspired action or intent or whatever like word choice you want to use. And I know that things are happening. So I think it's really important for people to not get so caught up maybe either in the exact goal, but like knowing like you're still making progress, you're still getting there. Like, I know the divine timing thing is like really hard for some people to swallow, because like, I want it right now. Like, I need the immediate satisfaction. But yeah, just acknowledging like you have one more than you did yesterday, or you feel better than you did, and you're still making progress. So I think that was really
absolutely.
I wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. It's really true. I mean, that's again goes back to the beliefs that you've set though, and what you've decided. So one of mine is everything moves me forward. And that's the thing. It's like, no matter if you really believe that, no matter what happens, and of course, we're all human. Some things are easier to believe. Some moments are easier to believe this than others. But, if you've decided that and you go back to that decision again and again, you can recognize that whatever does happen, it's moving you forward because that's what you decided. And part of that's perspective. And part of that is, I think, energetic as well, because it changes the way you show up as you move forward.
Yeah. So, okay, I know there was like these like shadow work prompts that we had done like within the course, and it's like these same 3 questions that you always are like, just do these every single time. So I would love for you, if you feel like sharing, I don't know if it's like secrets or something, but
no.
like, because I think for people, they're like, okay, I need to decide like what is the new framework for me? Like, I'm not feeling like that's the truth. And these are these like questions that you're like, okay, ask yourself these, and then you'll get to that point. So I'd love it if you could share those.
Sure. I don't remember the order of them or if this is the exact wording I gave you, but basically, all of the journal prompts in the world come down to really the same basic ideas. And preface, that's not saying you can't, use and enjoy certain journal prompts, because sometimes being told to look at something in a really specific way can be helpful. But sometimes also we think like until we have the perfect prompt, we can't dig into something. That's not true either, So we can ask, what am I afraid of? So specifically, if you're not getting something that you think you want, you could ask yourself, like, what am I afraid of happening when I get this thing? Because like we always assume that we definitely want something, but if you want something and you don't have it and you've been wanting it for a long time, it's very likely that there is some kind of fear underneath that. A fear of like what it would mean if you got it, what it would mean about you, et cetera, et cetera. So you can look at, what am I afraid of? You can look at, what you're afraid of. Okay, like what you're afraid that will happen, like I said before. And you can also just look at, what is coming up for me around the idea of having this thing or not having it, because depending on what's focused in your brain at the moment, you might be focusing more on the not having it. So you can ask yourself, like, what's coming up in general? I like leaving that open-ended because it's like, it might be good, it might be bad, whatever's coming up, we're going to write it down. What's coming up around having that thing or not having that thing? Like, what does it mean about you? What does it mean about your success, your dreams, et cetera? Like just seeing what comes out and observing it. The third question, I don't remember, but it was probably a variation on those two. If you know off the top of your head, please feel free to share.
Like, what do I want it to feel like, right?
Yes. Very good. So yeah, you can ask yourself, what you like looking at, what does this feel like now? It feels like shit. Or whatever, be as specific as you can. And then asking yourself, what do I want it to feel like? And that's like a great shortcut for everybody, because if you want something, you want it because it'll make you feel a certain way. And if you can feel that certain way, some people say it works because you are like a perfect match for the thing. Some people view it more as, well, now you have the thing you actually wanted. And so you don't have the resistance towards the symbol of the thing. And so when you don't have resistance to something, it tends just to show up in your life. There are lots of different perspectives on why this works, but ultimately, it doesn't really matter why it works, because ultimately it's going to make you feel better and less resistant towards the thing. And that is going to make you enjoy the process more, because, there's a real disservice done specifically to entrepreneurs, but I'm sure it applies to other areas too, where there's this like huge, massive desire to rush through things. And I feel it as much as anyone else, to rush through levels and like get to the next level constantly and quickly. And, what's the last time you actually just sat and like enjoyed where you are? I mean, have those of you listening, have you ever done that? When I first was asked that question by somebody, it's like, have I ever done that? I don't know if I have, that comes more naturally to some of us than others. Yeah. But when you feel better about the thing, you tend to be less resistant towards it. And then you're less resistant towards immediately having to change whatever in your life isn't that.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like whenever I did those like question prompts, I feel like it immediately like broke down that wall of like, I don't know, or like, I'm scared to like face it. Like, it makes it a lot easier to just literally ask yourself like, okay, what does this thing mean to me? Like, why am I afraid of it? Like what's going to happen if I have it or don't have it? Like, I think we often, and I think this goes along with what we were talking about, like where we see somebody else has something and they achieve something and we're like, okay, I need that. I want that. Yes. And it's like, why do I want that? Like, is it because I'm thinking like it's going to make me similar to them, or I'm going to be as cool as them, or whatever it is? And so like that already is like taking away your power. Like you're trying to be somebody else. And if we're not asking ourselves like the whole conversation we've been talking about, like, what do I want? Like, does it benefit me? Like, is it really meaningful to me to have this thing? Or is it just like the symbol, like you said, like what it symbolizes?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that. So I guess the last question for you would be like, do you have any like advice or anything like you want to share that we didn't talk about that I didn't ask you about during this interview?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think the main thing, if you get nothing else out of this, just remembering that any area of your life where someone else is telling you what you should think, feel, believe, or want, if that doesn't feel good, for lack of better terms, it's a little more complicated than good, but if that doesn't feel right, we'll say, then there's an opportunity there to choose something else. And this is where it's up to you to get really daring, really bold, about what you get to have and what you get to the world you get to live in. And that what this isn't, is it isn't saying that all you have to do is change a belief and everything that's been holding you back is going to disappear, including, you know, like legal issues and socioeconomic issues and like a million other things. But it's a place to start. And, you know, you can also start to just pick apart, like we said at the beginning, like what kind of dogmatic beliefs or teachers are you following? That's not saying you have to release them completely, but again, just really recognizing that you do have the sovereignty to decide this isn't the way I want to do things, and this is. Ultimately, just, you know, looking for people and surrounding yourself with people who are doing things in a way that you want to do it is going to be really helpful and make you really feel like it's possible. So if you just remember those things and give them a try, that will make such a difference. And then just finally making sure you're looking at the areas of your life where you are operating from that wishy-washy one foot in, 1 foot out place. That's fine. We don't have to judge that, but just recognizing like, I'm actually not all in here. Why? And is that something that I can change? Is that based in a fear? Or is it indicative of the fact that I don't maybe want this? Maybe I want something else.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love all of that. Yeah, I think asking yourself, like, I feel like even just saying like, what areas or aspects of my life have I never asked myself, like any like of these types of questions? Because I feel like there's certain in our life that we're like, when I move out, I'm never going to do what my parents do. Like, when I do this, like, there's certain parts of our life where we've already told ourselves, like, I don't choose this. I'm making my own rules. But I feel like there's certain aspects of our life where we never have asked ourselves that. And maybe like, this is your sign, right? Like, this is the time to do it, to be like, okay, I never asked myself, like, what I actually want to do for a living, like, you know, like what type of partner I actually want to have or things like that. And it's like, this is your chance to like question all those beliefs. Like, why did I choose this? Because somebody told me. Okay, let's change that, right? Like,
absolutely.
I feel like it's kind of like, I don't know, like you don't have to do it all at once. Like it would be a lot to do all of it.
Yeah.
So like over time, like going through and like, it's like cleaning the files in your computer. Like, is this still a relevant, like program for me, a relevant rule for me? Like, do I want to keep this and like remove what doesn't, like you said, align with you and make you feel good? I really love that. Okay. So, what are you working on? Where can we find you? Like, tell us all of that.
So you can find me anywhere on the internet, but I mostly hang out on Instagram, at Caitlin Matanle. And I'm sure that will be in the show notes because nobody can ever spell my name. But you can find me there. Anything that came up during this discussion that you want to ask questions about or talk about, I'm always super open to that. And there's one opportunity to work with me the rest of the year. It's my 10 of Pentacles Business Mastermind. And that's a group business mastermind for anyone earning $1,000 a month in their business or more. It's a mastermind that grows with you. And that's really about building, like I said, the structured, safe, stable feeling foundations in your business that will allow you to grow that business on your own terms, with your own set of rules, with your own goals in mind, so that it looks exactly the way you want to look and ultimately is something that you can continue to build on that won't, take you to a certain point and then crumble, as is really common with a lot of people in business. So it's really about how can we move through the earth energy that roots our kind of cosmic visions, like Amanda said in my bio. How can we root that down to the earth so that we can really use our businesses as vessels of personal growth, financial growth, and spiritual growth, and continue to build as we grow into higher levels of prosperity.
Yeah. And if you're not a business owner, I mean, I would just give Caitlin a follow, because like I was saying, like she posts all these like mind-blowing like concepts. Like, you don't have to do this. You can make and I'm like, wow, like this is
totally. I actually have a lot of non-business owners follow me. Sometimes they're people who knew me from other, paths of life, or just other people I've met. And yeah, I actually have a lot of people who are like, I'm not even a business owner, who are on my email list, which you can also find in my Instagram bio. So you can go over there, connect with me there, get on my email list. But yeah, a lot of people actually are like, I'm not even a business owner, but this applies to me in this other way. And also, probably even more people are always will come and say, like, I didn't think I was a business owner or wanted to be a business owner because I had all these ideas about what that had to look like. And now I do. I get messages like that all the time, which is my favorite because I'm a Capricorn stellium and I want everyone to start a badass business. But yes, definitely come hang out with me, whether you're a business owner or not. And we'll include links in the show notes to everything we just talked about too.
Yeah. And then lastly, this is being recorded on Indigenous Peoples Day. So I just wanted to acknowledge, like, where I am in North Hollywood is on Tongva land. So that's where this was recorded. And I know that you're in Mexico. So I don't know if you know specifically, but I know like largely all of Mexico is like Mexica, or most people know it like Aztec.
Yeah, so I live in Mexico City, so I'm on Mexica land. Yes, without going to a giant history lesson about Mexica versus Aztec, yes, you are correct.
Yeah, I know. That's something that, like, yeah. My boyfriend is Native and he's Mexican, so like we've been like learning and unlearning these like colonizer terms.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
So, yeah,
absolutely. Super cool.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. For coming here on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. You were just reading my mind. I was just thinking that in my head. I've loved this conversation. We could keep talking about this for another hour at least.
I know. There's so much like to unpack, and I feel like we've covered like good like starting points for people to start like looking at their life in this way. And I feel like it's so impactful because it can go in any aspect of our life. So yeah, thank you for coming on the podcast, for being like the first guest on here. I'm like, I've heard you like at least 5 times. I'm just gonna bring you on here. And yeah, I'll put everything like how to connect with Kaylin in the show notes. And yeah, that's pretty much it, what I have for the podcast. And I hope everybody has a great Friday and continues to connect. And if you have anything, like Kaylin said, like if you want to share anything that comes up, feel free like reaching out to her or to me as well. Like I'd love to know like what like mind-blowing things come from this, because it was really powerful. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I've loved this conversation.
Yay. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you love Witchy and Weird podcasts, support us by donating monthly for as little as 99 cents at anchor.fm/witchyandweird/support. You can cancel at any time and 100% of the proceeds go directly to the pod. Or, if you don't want to commit to a monthly donation, buy Amanda a coffee at ko-fi.com/witchyandweird to help fuel them while they record, edit, create, and upload content for the podcast. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and tell your Witchy and Weird friends about us too. Bye!